Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge the traditional guardians of the land on which we're meeting, the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to the elders past and present. So, welcome to the conversation this evening. We're talking about what I and many people think is a really important and pressing issue that faces us today, that artificial intelligence is bringing into sharp focus very soon. So let's begin. I'll begin by just introducing our four experts that are joining me today to have this conversation with you about the future of warfare and killer robots. So immediately next to me is Ugo Pagallo. He was previously a lawyer, but now is a professor of jurisprudence in Italy, and he is one of the leading experts in Europe about these sorts of topics. Next across is Stuart Russell. Stuart Russell is a professor of computer science at the University of California at Berkeley. He's one of the world's leading experts in AI, and also he's spoken at the UN on these and other topics, and perhaps he's even more famous as being Johnny Depp in what was the movie again? I always forget. Transcendence. Yeah. So the University of California professor who was he assassinated successfully? He was assassinated successfully.
He does eventually.
He was eventually
die. Yes, his body
assassinated. Who was played by Johnny Depp, of course, is in real life. Stuart, so you have got Johnny Depp here.
Striking resemblance.
Striking resemblance. You know. We can all think who we'd like to play us when we're dead, but Stuart doesn't have to think that. It's Johnny Depp. And then finally, we've got Margaret Beavis, who is from the Medical Association for the Prevention of War, which founded ICANN here in Melbourne, which was very recently led to the successful UN ban on nuclear weapons, which was a very symbolic and important moment in, I hope, what is going to be the eventual elimination of nuclear weapons from our planet. So let me join with me in welcoming all our four panelists. Oh, and I guess I should tell you who I am. My name's Toby Walsh. I'm also a professor of AI, and I have also been rather involved in this discussion and debate around killer robots. So, Stuart, can you tell us what we're talking about? What should we be worried about in killer robots? Most people, of course, can be thinking about Terminator, but that's not quite true, is it?
So I think we should use the correct technical term, lethal autonomous weapons system. And it's important to understand what we mean by autonomy. And this is often used as an excuse not to do anything about them because it's too difficult to define what we mean by autonomy and so on. It's very simple. So just as a chess program chooses where to move the pieces and which of your pieces to capture, an autonomous weapon chooses where to go and who to kill. It's not very complicated. So the reason that that's a problem, there are reasons having to do with international law. For example, they might decide by accident to kill a civilian. So the ability to discriminate between civilians and soldiers is a requirement for compliance with international law, and if the machine can't do that, then it would be a war crime to use it. There's also the issue of accidental escalation, where the weapons, if they are authorized to respond to perceived attacks, could start a war by themselves that would escalate so fast, just as happened with the flash crash on the stock market, the humans wouldn't be able to be consulted or intervene, and you would very quickly get into a real war unintentionally. But I think, to me, the biggest concern is that by the very nature of autonomy, if you don't need a human to be making those decisions about where the weapon goes and who it kills, then you decouple the number of weapons that you can deploy from the number of humans that are needed to do that deploying. So even though 1 million machine guns can kill just as many people as a nuclear weapon, 1 million machine guns need 1 million soldiers to carry them and 5 million people to support and train and feed and transport those 1 million soldiers. So you can only do death on that scale if you're a nation state. But with autonomous weapons, you can put 3 million lethal weapons in a truck. And 2 guys can drive it, 1 guy...
So, Stuart, just describe to the audience what those weapons would be.
Yeah. So the kind of weapon we're talking about could, for example, be similar to the quadcopters that you can buy in a toy store that are about 1 inch in diameter. And all they need to do is carry about 1 gram of high explosive shape charge. And a shape charge of that size can blow a hole in 1 centimeter of steel plate. So it can easily blow a hole in your head and kill you. So you can just imagine that these things would fly out of the truck in a huge swarm, just like a swarm of midges on a summer day, except that each one of them will be looking for a human, satisfying the targeting criteria, which might be, males between the age of 10 and 60, for example, looking for a human to kill. And even if it's only 30 or 40, 50% successful, it's still easily sufficient to wipe out a large city or a small country with a couple of trucks.
And this is why it's not exaggerating to call them weapons of mass destruction.
They are weapons of mass destruction that will be cheaper, easier to build, easier to buy on the open arms trade market, and much easier to deploy because, as I said, you don't need a whole military-industrial complex to create and deliver the weapons.
So, Ugo, just to go back to Stuart's claim that it's easy to define autonomy. You're a lawyer, and I suspect you may not be so easy.
It's not so easy, but for once as a lawyer, I'll try to transmit an easy message. That is that we don't have to wait till the very moment in which these machines will become really human-like autonomous, fully autonomous, you name it, in order to upset basic pillars of our current legal systems and the like. Let me give you another example on top of what we heard before. Since we are using these smart machines, robotics, weapons, as just to substitute humans, the result is that we are, in many cases, sending no humans to the battlefield. And the fact that we are not risking the lives of anybody's daughter and son has already had a significant result. That is, the war is becoming more an administrative affair rather than a political issue. If you pay attention, over the past 15 years, there has been no political debate before the US Congress in order to authorize the president for any drone operation. It has become an administrative affair. The responsible is a CIA officer. Another important issue to be stressed is this one. That is, once the war is becoming more a matter of, we can even imagine, as a matter of fact, a war between two robot armies. So back to your question, we don't need full autonomous lethal weapons in order to observe how things are dramatically changing in ethical terms, because then we have another critical issue here is, would it be acceptable to have a machine, even by the sake of the argument, a machine that is really able to abide by the Geneva Conventions and the 1977 Protocol?
Just tell the audience what the 77 Protocol is.
Actually, when we refer to the international humanitarian law, we are technically speaking referring to these protocols added in 1977. That is how, among other things, for example, the very distinction between civilians and combatants, and how we should treat both and the like, especially the civilian populations affected by the warfare, are legally regulated by these protocols. But the point is, back to the key issue, even if, for the sake of the argument, we could set up a really smart AI combatant, capable to abide by the laws of war, really human-like autonomous, would it be acceptable that such a smart machine could decide by itself whether or not to kill humans?
Margaret, would it be acceptable?
I think there are major questions about accountability with artificial intelligence, that if you have a weapon that does kill inappropriately in human rights law and in humanitarian law, then is the commander to blame if he can say that this weapon made the choice, he didn't make the choice? And I think the drone illustration is the very good example of how killing in countries like Pakistan, which America is not at war, has become acceptable. And the impacts on the communities in Pakistan and the impacts on the drone operators are really significant, but there is no real regulation or responsibility taken at a government level.
So is this the responsibility gap that we should be worried about?
Absolutely. I think that it comes down again to meaningful human control, and with that comes responsibility.
Ugo, is the responsibility gap a legal problem?
Practically speaking, yes.
Who do we prosecute when war crimes are committed by autonomous weapons?
Commander in chief, and then the military responsible for a certain operation and all the links in between. But here we have the problem. That is, in a way, we could say that the current laws of war, including international humanitarian law, are good enough in order to govern what's going on with the automatization of weapons and the like. But to be realistic, over the past 15-20 years, we have had serious problems of enforcement of the current laws of war and international humanitarian law. When in 1999 there was a Treaty of Rome for the setting of the International Criminal Court, there was half an hour of optimism that we could have start solving this kind of problems. Enforcing the current laws of war. But what's going on with the ICC, the International Criminal Court, it's really telling. First, superpowers, including the US and Russia, are not part of the convention, and there are real issues concerning the legitimization of the court. So, in a way, the current state of international law, give us a real pessimistic picture of how to govern autonomous weapons and this kind of technology.
So if we put aside for a second the effectiveness of the court, I still have, I've always never understood the technical claim that IHL, International Humanitarian Law, was adequate, because if that technical claim, and this is a question for anyone, if that technical claim is right, then why have we introduced any other type of arms limitations? For other types of anti-personnel mines, for blinding lasers, all
chemical
of the
weapons.
Chemical weapons, since IHL already existed, why was it necessary then to identify, to pick out new technologies that came along and introduce special legislation for them, if IHL is always the correct answer?
I think it's worth looking at some research that came out of Chatham House a couple of years ago, which looked at the 13 near misses that have happened since the 1960s with nuclear weapons, where the world has come within an inch of really major nuclear war. In 1983 there was a Russian situation where they mistook some glinting off some American bases and thought that this was nuclear missiles being launched. And it was only because of one man, Stanislav Petrov, who said, no, we're going to wait the extra time until we get confirmation with another system before we launch our own missiles. And a similar thing happened in 1995, where they decided that a Trident missile had been launched. And again, that went through to Boris Yeltsin, and it was actually human intervention that stopped that. But we have come 13 times incredibly close to effectively nuclear Armageddon, and it has been human intervention that stopped it. So it doesn't matter what the criminal court is doing, doesn't matter what the human rights are, if you have weapons that can make decisions without the sort of human responsibility and compassion and understanding of what is about to be unleashed, then it's very problematic.
In 95, that was it a Norwegian rocket launching a peaceful satellite, and
yes.
they'd even notified the Russians that it was going up, but it hadn't got to the right person, and so it was a classic human error.
Yeah. And humans err. But they also understand that humans err.
Stuart, you want to say something?
So I often hear this argument. In fact, the UK's position is both that it's so unclear what we even mean by autonomy in an autonomous weapon that it's impossible to regulate or start thinking about a treaty. But at the same time, international humanitarian law is completely adequate to cover all the issues. Which is
this was a statement they reinforced yesterday in response to the open letter that was actually published here in Melbourne, and made it very clear that this was going to be their position, right?
Yes. So, right. I mean, the position also is we have no idea what these weapons are, but whatever they are, we don't have any of them.
This makes no logical sense at all.
So
right?
it seems to me to be obfuscation. And I think the third point they wanted to make was that by banning lethal autonomous weapons, you would infringe their right to make non-lethal autonomous weapons, which also, to me, doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And so you have to wonder what's going on in the interior planning and decision making.
Is it the military-industrial complex wanting to make more money out of selling these toys?
Well, interestingly, so BAE Systems, formerly British Aerospace, is the second largest manufacturer of weapons in the world, at least in the Western world, and a very big contributor to Britain's balance of payments. But their chairman actually declared that his corporation would never make autonomous weapons, and that handing over the decision to a machine to kill a human is fundamentally wrong. And that was at the beginning of a debate that happened at the World Economic Forum last January 2016, which is sort of very disappointing for those who were looking forward to a really meaty debate.
So how do Sir John Carr explain the existence then in his company of the Tyrannis drone prototype? Which is designed to be eventually a lethal autonomous drone.
Which has been advertised as building on the technology of full autonomy, to quote some of their advertising materials.
And is designed to be the replacement for the Tornado fighter in the UK's Air Force.
Yep. So that's a very good question. I'm not sure how he's going to explain that position to his marketing department and perhaps to his shareholders, but that is his statement. So I think it's not necessarily the case that militaries and defense corporations are unanimously in favor. In fact, I believe the deputy to the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the U.S., Paul Selva, I think his name is, made a statement recently saying that he was adamantly opposed to autonomous weapons, that was a bad strategic idea as well as a bad moral idea. So I think the debate is continuing, but I really feel like from a diplomatic and geopolitical point of view, it's really on a knife edge. I think the decision could go either way. The major powers could delay and prevaricate until it's too late, or they could have the gumption to actually act.
So just before we move off IHL and on other aspects of this problem, can we build machines today, or could we build machines in the future that were able to follow AHL?
So there's three parts. I mean, Ugo will probably correct me, but the one that everyone thinks about is the ability to discriminate between civilians and soldiers. And in some circumstances, that's quite easy because
And civilians and wounded, combatants and wounded combatants, and combatants who want to surrender.
right. So that's the aspect of military necessity. So people who are hors de combat are not supposed to be attacked. People who are surrendering, people who are running away, there's no military necessity to kill them, and so on. So, and obviously there are gray areas, and it's very complex, and that's precisely where AI is completely unable at present to make any sensible decision. Military necessity and proportionality, which is about how much collateral damage can you cause, depends on the importance of the military objective, and whether you have other means of achieving it. Those things are really hard for AI systems to do. But I think people argue with some validity that machines do not suffer from fear, so they don't immediately start firing their guns at anything that moves just in case it's an enemy. They don't suffer from anger, so they're not taking revenge for the death of their colleagues, and so on. And those human emotions have caused massacres of civilians in the past. So I think that's a valid point in favor of the machine. But the other thing to notice is that these decisions are not made in isolation. When you set the mission, there's actually a sort of a sharing of the decision making between the human who decides what the mission is and the machine that's carrying out. So, for example, if the human knows that there are no civilians in a given region, that all the moving humans in that region are combatants, then even if the machine is not particularly good at discriminating, it's still okay. I mean, bombs are not very good at discriminating either. And it's the humans, then it's always all of the job is placed on the human to know that they're bombing a place that is a legitimate target.
But isn't one of the real challenges here the temporal extent that these weapons will have? We'll send drones up in the air, they'll fly around, loiter for days at a time, and then they'll look at a convoy on the ground and they'll have to make a decision that it's a military convoy and not a wedding party. And it won't be anything to do with the situation when the person who launched that drone, it will be a completely different world, and we'll be using them.
And that's the argument against landmines, that even though when the landmines were sown originally, they were there to cover the retreat of your forces, for example. They sit around for years killing people. And so the US currently, although they haven't subscribed to the landmine treaty, does limit the lifetime of their landmines, I think, is to 6 hours. And so...
Which is stricter than the landmine treaty itself. I mean, they actually follow arguably stricter rules than the landmine treaty.
Yeah. So these questions become really complicated. With bombs, it's actually somewhat simple. It's the human's job to figure it out whether this is a legitimate target. When the machine itself has some discriminatory capability and perhaps some judgment of necessity, then it becomes shared, and then it can actually become much more complicated for the human to figure out, given how smart my machine is it legitimate for me to release it into this particular scenario? And you think about a heat-seeking missile that that people use for air-to-air combat. Well, that's a sort of autonomous weapon, right? It has a very simple targeting criterion: hot things, right? And usually in air-to-air combat, hot things are the engine, the exhaust of other aircraft. But they could be friendly aircraft, they could be civilian aircraft, or they could just get loose, and it could be a power station chimney, or it could be an incinerator in a public facility. So the point is, heat-seeking missiles are legal, but they have to be used in the right context, and the judgment of the pilot that this is an appropriate context in which to fire a missile. And just sort of launching a missile in the general direction of a city is a war crime because it'd be indiscriminate. The missile is not capable of deciding itself what's a target once it gets to the city. So there are some missiles, the long-range anti-ship missile, for example, which is an over-the-horizon missile that's you fire it, and then when it gets to the enemy fleet, it decides which ship to blow up. Well, of course, there may be civilian shipping when it gets there, and commanders found that there were really no circumstances when they were sufficiently confident that the weapon could be used. So in fact, it became useless, at least in the hands of scrupulous commanders, because it's too much of a grey area to decide to deploy it.
Ugo, do you see some legal challenges with this temporal
Let me
extent?
go back to your previous question. That is, if we have the international humanitarian law, why should we need further?
I never thought that question was well answered. I'm still struggling to answer that.
Generally speaking, we could say that whereas the rules of international humanitarian law are to be evaluated post facto, that is, what proportionality, what has been necessary, the like, you can evaluate the proportional attack or conduct in, technically speaking, using by law, that is, the conduct on the battlefield. It's not a theoretical issue, it's an empirical matter to determine how the conduct was on the battlefield. Whereas if you introduce a special international agreements, banning chemical weapons, landmines and the like, you have an a priori rule. That is, whatever your intention, if you are using a chemical weapon, you are wrong. So then you have further differences, but the key difference is, whereas if we are talking about IHL, it's more a matter of an empirical evaluation of the conduct on the battlefield. If we are talking about international agreements banning specific weapons, well, you have an, so to speak, a priori evaluation of a military decision. Whatever your opinion, if you are using a chemical, we didn't need to interview the Syrian president in order to determine whether his use of chemical weapons was legitimate or not. So a priori was a war crime.
So are you suggesting that we only need to ban indiscriminate weapons? Like chemical weapons?
The fact is, first, every lawyer would tell you that the legal devil is in the detail. And
I told you he was originally a lawyer, he's still a lawyer.
But of course, first you have to determine the clauses of the ban. Ideally speaking, if you decide to ban a certain kind of weapon, it's a binary option. Either you're using it or you're not using it, and period. In our case, I mean, talking about autonomous weapons, so if I'm optimistic, what I could imagine is a political debate before the UN determining the conditions of a legitimate use of this kind of weapons. I hope to be wrong, but I think that in the short, medium term, we are not going to have any kind of political agreement before the United Nations. As a matter of fact, today we had the bad news that after 13 years, the political debate on cyber warfare before the UN failed. I don't see a good reason to be optimistic if the topic becomes the ban of autonomous weapons.
So So,
but just to be optimistic, so what to do? Because I don't see any other international institution aside from the United Nations to discuss this kind of topic and urgency and the like. On the other hand,
there are three sides to every argument with an academic.
On the other hand,
Four sides.
The good old joke is I love the only armed lawyer because he will, when he says on the other hand, be ready for the trick. On the other hand, in light of the state of affairs and how international law is nowadays, I would suggest that the major role will be played by public opinion. That is, only under pressure of public opinion, maybe national sovereign states that now think that they have a technological advantage, political superiority, and the like, maybe the real alternative to the failure of traditional international law is the mobilization of public opinion.
Now, Margaret, you hopefully are a bit more optimistic about the UN's ability to do something since you've had recent success.
Yes.
So fill us with some hope.
Well, I think the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, in fact, started here in Melbourne, and it was modelled on the landmines campaign. And what it did is, instead of following the consensus approach that has been used so far, which the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons is looking at artificial intelligence and the lethal autonomous weapon systems. So what we did with nuclear weapons to get around the consensus, because consensus is extremely easy to block, is that we mobilised public opinion and got organisations that already existed. So in over 100 countries, we mobilised 440 organisations, such as the Red Cross, Oxfam, unions, public health organisations, and then educated governments. We had 3 large conferences, international conferences, where we got governments, over 150 governments came to each of these 3 conferences about the appalling consequences of use of nuclear weapons. So they no longer could plead ignorance. And then last year we had an open-ended working group. So this was outside the Non-Proliferation Treaty, because once again, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, like the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, is a consensus-driven treaty. So this was a process outside that went through the General Assembly. So after a working group last year that met a couple of times, in which the Australian government tried unsuccessfully to stop, we had a vote just before Christmas where the General Assembly said, yes, go ahead, negotiate this treaty. We give you 2 sets of time this year to negotiate. And because it was a General Assembly mandate passed by, I think it was 124 nations, then we were able to go ahead and do that. And in fact, I was an observer at the negotiations that were held in June, July, and it was really incredibly exciting to watch. There were over 130 countries there debating, and it was really, I think if you can change the process away from a consensus one, then you have quite a lot of hope. And I think it's almost the democratisation of the United Nations, in that what's happened is that the smaller countries who do not have these appalling weapons, so there's 9 countries in the world that effectively hold the world to ransom. So the smaller countries are saying, no, we're not going to be held to ransom anymore. We don't think these are acceptable. They're just as bad as chemical weapons. They're just as bad as biological weapons. Nuclear weapons should no longer be a source of prestige. They should be a source of shame. And it works in several ways. It works, this treaty, people say, okay, you've got a treaty, so what? Well, what that means now is we can now work on divestment. It also has ramifications for the military. The military think long and hard about using weapons that have been declared by public opinion to be illegal. And so there's the money, there's the money side of it, there's the military side of it, and also then there's the prestige side of it, that governments now really have to think about their nuclear weapons programs in a different way. So I think the United Nations is probably the best body we have. It's not perfect, but it may need to be that the campaign has to be reframed.
And we presumably should thank the Norwegian government for giving millions to mobilise that public support.
Yes, as I said, the campaign started here, and we had a very generous donor who started here, but then after about 2 years, the Norwegian government kicked in $3 million from their I forgot the mental block on the money that they've got from the North Sea oil. And that really meant that the campaign could spread around the world. So yes, we do need a big donor to mobilise the campaign against killer robots. So if anybody's got a spare 3 or 4 million out there, please.
But that's pocket change for changing the world.
Yeah, well, it's been remarkable. I think the one of the key levers was galvanising existing organisations that understood the humanitarian impacts. It's sort of putting humans front and centre was the key.
And whilst we're talking about pocket change for changing the world, I would like people to know that the formal talks that were supposed to start on Monday at the United Nations in Geneva about lethal autonomous weapons were cancelled for want of $200,000.
Mm.
And that's, again, pocket change, and we're not discussing this very important issue for want of almost, chicken feed on the global scale of what we're talking about. So,
I think one of the difficulties in terms of public opinion is that with nuclear weapons, we have ample evidence of their terrible effects. We have footage of explosions. We have footage of victims. We know very clearly what they can do. With autonomous weapons, invariably in the media, it's the Terminator and Skynet, and it always looks like science fiction. And no one is building anything like a Terminator, and it wouldn't really serve much purpose. And it's actually sort of embarrassing, if you're an AI or robotics researcher, that the Terminator robots fire all these bullets and miss the humans. I mean, what kind of a pathetic computer program is that? When you have reaction times that are 1 million times faster than the human and you're still missing, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I think one of the things that would be effective is to try to bring home to people what it would really be like with weapons that are likely to be coming down the pipe fairly soon. And if you can imagine what it would be like to be living in a city that's under attack from 50 million small lethal self-directed drones that cooperate, that hunt you down even if you're hiding, that show absolutely no mercy whatsoever. If we can visualize that and make it concrete and clear to people what that will be like, I think it would be effective.
So so people know, the Samsung Sentry robot, which is actually operational in the DMZ between North and South Korea, is deadly accurate. It's not going to make all those mistakes. It's supposed to be able to shoot you with high precision from 4 kilometers away. So I guess I should end with the question to all of you that was asked in the title of this conversation, which is this the end of warfare as we know it?
The sting in the tail there is as we know it. I don't think it's the end of warfare.
No.
I think it may be a whole new chapter.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, most people feel that it reduces the threshold for going to war, just as drones have, because you can carry out war remotely with no direct risk, no political risk domestically.
But we've probably been drawn into these conflicts because of that very thought with the drones. And that we're never going to solve them by just raining terror from above on those places.
It's an excuse not to solve the real problems, and sometimes people ask, well, wouldn't it be great if our soldiers didn't have to die and their soldiers didn't have to die and the robots can just fight it out? But think about it. Right, so suppose your robots fight it out with their robots and your robots don't, your robots lose. What's going to happen next? Are you going to say, okay, fine, you get to take over our country and, steal all our women and kill all our children and everything else?
We wouldn't even need robots for that. We could just play a game of chess.
Exactly, right. I mean, if that were true, right, if you would accept the results of the robot-on-robot fighting, and then act exactly as if you had lost a real war, then precisely we could just have the war by champions or the war by tiddlywinks. And whoever wins the Tiddlywinks gets to take over the other country.
Tiddlywinks is a quaint English game played in pubs.
As you can probably guess. But it doesn't work that way, right? You surrender when the human cost to your population, your ability to maintain the coherence of governing structures, and so on, has completely failed, right? You don't surrender just because some of your robots got shot down. And so it won't prevent war from having human costs at all. And in fact, it seems likely to me that the human cost could be much greater because the targets would be the human populations.
Ugo.
The short answer, yes, things will dramatically change.
On the other hand?
On the other hand, think about cyber warfare as the other side of this coin. But, with a curiosity, my remark, most European anthems refer to yourself ready to sacrifice, and if you check how many the term blood appears in the European national anthems, except the Spanish anthem because it has no text. And this tradition comes from ancient Greek times. So that tradition, 2.5 millennia of our history probably will end.
Sounds like a good thing.
No, because then on the other hand, we have that's dialectics. That is, technology maybe solves some problems, but it realigns the world. So you're going to have a different kind of issue. And the different kind of issue here is, well, it's easy to see a future in which both armies are made of robot soldiers, and most of the traditional kinetic force has been replaced by cyber force. Since, how to put it, ours are information-driven societies. Without, you stop the information flow and you have no energy, no trains, anything. So information data is our vital resource. Well, it's even pretty obvious that the main target of a military attack is going to be data and information. And we are already in this kind of society if the first cyber attack is 10 years old. 2007, Estonia, that little European country close to Russia, was paralyzed for a whole weekend. But they were lucky enough because in that very weekend there was the most important international conference in cybersecurity. They had la crème de la crème of the experts in cybersecurity. Lucky. But so, and that's another very interesting point. 10 years after, we don't know who was the author of that attack. Off the records, we have some ideas about who was the responsible authority for that attack. But officially, and even more specifically, from a legal viewpoint, we have no guilty responsible author of the first important cyber attack in our history.
Okay, well, the conversation just opened up completely because now we're talking about autonomous cyber warfare and the new face of war. But let's open up even further by bringing the audience in.
Yeah, thanks. I'll start with the warm-up one. So a lot of what's being developed right now, especially in DARPA and whatnot, is these human enhancement tools, so exoskeletons. Perhaps there's always been work to perhaps enhance our abilities. So DARPA is now working on neural interfacing, especially to be able to then allow people to fly things remotely, to control robots remotely. So there is definitely a world which we're moving to very, very quickly, which is not so much about autonomy, just a kind of superhuman augmentation And I think that the other place that a huge amount of automation is being worked on is in logistics. So you can kind of imagine having huge robot armies deliver guns still doesn't seem much more fulfilling than having, even if they can't shoot them. So perhaps you could cover both human augmentation, things like exoskeletons, fly-by-wire, and then also automation in logistics for war.
Okay, I don't think that's a warm-up question. That's a whole new challenging question. So, augmentation of us by machine.
I think that still comes under the meaningful human control category. I don't know whether the others would agree with that. So I think that's almost a concerning development, but a separate issue.
Yeah, suits of armor are an exoskeleton in a sense. We've been augmenting humans so that they can function more effectively in warfare for thousands of years, and I don't see these particular developments as especially threatening. They don't create a risk of mass destruction weapons.
What if they make war?
I think it's appalling that to be a soldier you have to be subjected to brain surgery and have all these things put into your body so that you can be operated remotely by the military-industrial complex. And coming back to the cyber warfare question, I think if you commit that your defense posture is based on autonomous weapons, you'd better be absolutely sure that they can't be hacked. It's very hard to hack a human being. It's easier to hack a human being that has internet connection implanted into their brain. No, I mean there's nothing that someone sitting in Moscow with a keyboard can do to a disconnected human soldier. But they can subvert your defense capability if it's based on autonomous systems, so that you may think you have weapons, but in fact your entire defense posture now belongs to another country, and you may not even realize it. So it introduces a level of uncertainty about the current strategic balance. So a lot of international security is based on knowledge. It isn't just who has how many weapons, it's that the other side knows how many weapons the other side has. And so they know that it's not a good idea to engage in certain adventures. But if you increase the level of uncertainty, you may reduce the level of stability.
I'm not convinced by this, by the argument to ban autonomous lethal weapons. Not that I don't think that we should have such a thing, we shouldn't have such things, but I think the point is that we really need to abstract this to a different level. I think the point for me is that, for example, I think you asked this question at the very beginning. If we could build autonomous lethal weapon systems that conformed perfectly to the Geneva Convention, so in some sense they were the perfect, well-behaved soldier. So setting aside whether you believe that we should have warfare at all, then what is wrong with that? Okay, so isn't that exactly what we would like to have? I think what we should be doing really is sort of lifting this to banning any weapon that fails the following kinds of tests: that there isn't meaningful human responsibility, and that the weapon is precise and not indiscriminate. And I think that covers, to a large extent, the examples that you've given. But I think banning exclusive, but focusing on autonomous lethal weapon systems is actually the wrong place to look.
So I don't agree. I think there's the property of autonomy that, to me, that's problematic is precisely that autonomy equals scalability. That you create weapons of mass destruction. We have those already and we wish we didn't. So why are we making more of them?
But I think that we don't have to forget the premise of your argument. That is that in light of current state of the art, we simply don't have the technology in order to get these wise autonomous weapons. So that the next issue is the military has somehow to test what they are developing in the labs. And so, well, my doubt is that they've been testing in real life scenarios the weapons in order to understand how things go. I don't have any proof about that, but it's not a sci-fi scenario to imagine that they are testing their research on autonomous weapons in real life scenarios. By sure, this is what's happening with the cyber attacks. In the field of autonomous weapons, I think that there has been some sort of real life testing.
The military appears to be interested in the potential for jet fighters to control their plane with direct thought control rather than using their arms. The reaction time you shave off will be milliseconds, said Dr. Tom Oxley, a neurosurgeon at the University of Melbourne's Royal Melbourne Hospital. Him and his colleague are doing research for the
can we keep this a little bit shorter, please?
Advanced Research Project Agency. I'm just wondering about brain-machine interface and the potential of the humans becoming the AI robot that we need to stop.
Okay. Stuart?
So it's not clear to me that brain-machine interfaces in aerial combat give one a huge advantage. But it is clear that autonomous aerial combat aircraft would have a huge advantage because they have reaction times in microseconds instead of in seconds.
And they could pull more serious G than any human could
Right.
live through.
They are much cheaper to build, they can accelerate much faster, maneuver much more quickly. So I think humans, even with brain-machine interfaces, would be completely defenseless and they would sort of lose every such contest. And there are some. So Henry Kissinger, although he agrees with the ban on autonomous anti-personnel weapons, believes that there are reasons to allow autonomous aerial combat and submarine warfare where there isn't really the weapon of mass destruction argument and there isn't really the issue of indiscriminate killing of civilians because there aren't usually civilians under the ocean, and I think it's a point of view that you have to take seriously. And Henry Kissinger was in fact instrumental in bringing about the biological weapons treaty because he was able to convince Nixon to renounce the American biological weapons program for precisely the same reason that I'm arguing, which is that if they were developed as weapons, they would quickly proliferate, they would be cheap and easy for smaller countries and non-state actors to use against the United States. And so his argument was that proceeding to full weaponization of biological agents would reduce the national security of the United States. And I'm arguing the same thing. The major powers need to understand that pushing ahead with these kinds of programs will reduce the security of their own populations.
Okay, well, we're going to end with one last question, which is, Ugo, since I've been asking you questions all evening, I guess I should only give you the right to ask the last question of me.
In a way, it's the natural follow-up of what Stuart was saying. That is, as you know better than me, when we are talking about lethal autonomous weapon systems, there are plenty of them. Think about the irony that we still talk about a minister of defense organizing attacks. So in a way, you are proposing the ban of all this set of weapons, although they are very different. In some cases, we are talking about defensive systems. Think about the dome in Israel and the like. So, about a possible critique would be that of a generalization. That is, you are making all these cows agree. All the lethal weapons are the same. What would you be be your response to that critique?
Well, both Stuart and I signed the open letter back in 2015, which asked for a ban on offensive autonomous weapons. That idea wasn't picked up by the United Nations. I thought it was actually a very good distinction to be made, but for better or for worse, it didn't seem to be an idea that connected with the diplomats. So you go with what they're going to, at the end of the day, I think you need to be very practical and hope we get something. Stuart?
Yeah, so I have had some discussions and with people who, both in the diplomatic and military arenas, and the distinction between defensive and offensive weapons can be difficult. There are some weapons that are clearly defensive because they're fixed in position, and so point defense systems for forward operating bases, anti-missile defenses on ships are clearly defensive. You can't really use them to attack things. But they're also not lethal, right? They're designed to destroy incoming mortar bombs or incoming missiles, and missiles don't usually carry passengers. So they're not going to be subject to a ban at all. Now, one of the critical issues, I think, is that we don't want to impede the development of defenses against swarm weapons. Unless, of course, the only defense people can come up with is another swarm. In which case, you can't ban the swarms that say defensive on the side, but they're identical to the ones that say offensive on the side, right? If it's the same weapon, then it either is banned or it isn't banned, and you can't necessarily make that distinction. So if it's a fixed laser device that shoots the little swarm vehicles down one by one, or if it's a an electromagnetic pulse weapon, those are clearly anti-swarm defenses that are not going to be banned. I think there's something that we haven't talked about, which is that the moral nature of the decision to turn over life and death to a machine. And when Roger Carr, the chairman of British Aerospace, or BAE Systems, said that his corporation was not going to make these weapons, he was really making a moral statement. It's fundamentally wrong to turn over that decision to a machine. And there is, as part of international humanitarian law, something called the Martins Clause. I'm not sure I can quote it exactly, but it basically says that we have to respect the dictates of public conscience. That if a weapon just violates the dictates of public conscience, then it's a war crime to use it. Now, I don't think the public conscience is necessarily gelled in one direction or another because they don't have concrete experience and examples and so on. So one of the things we can do is to help provide more information about the nature of these weapons, what they would likely be. But this fundamental question, does it reduce the value of human life and dignity to say that a little piece of plastic and silicon gets to decide which people live and die? I think that you could make that argument.
So I think that's a wonderful point to finish the conversation with tonight, and to take home the idea that Stuart was just giving us, that the importance of the public perception of this, and what Margaret was saying about the importance of public pressure in what achieved the ban on nuclear weapons. And so thank you very much for coming along and informing yourself about this issue. So please join with me in thanking the panelists for sharing all of their wonderful expertise.